On behalf of the Institute for Public Education, British Columbia, I want to thank the BCTF for this chance to introduce our new organization to all of you. To do that, to introduce the Institute for Public Education, British Columbia, let me tell you a story. It's a true story, and it happened to a dear friend of mine many years ago when she was teaching kindergarten. It was the first day of school, and you know how things are in a kindergarten, the first day of school. There was a lot of noise. There was some confusion. There were some tears. Some of the kids were crying. Some of their parents were crying. Now, at this particular school, the way the day started was 9 o'clock would come, the bell would ring, and O Canada would start to play over the PA system. So that's what happened. 9 o'clock came, the bell rang, and O Canada started to play over the PA. And nobody noticed. Too much noise. Except one little guy in the corner. He could hear the music. He was looking around, trying to figure out where that music was coming from. And my friend, the teacher, watched him, looking around. Finally, he wandered over to where she was standing, and he pulled her sleeve, and he looked up at her, and he said, "Is there a hockey game starting here somewhere?" Really happened. It's a true story. I want us to think for a minute about that little guy. He was actually quite amazing. He got some data. He analyzed the data. He made an inference based on the data, and he put forward a hypothesis. 5 years old. Except for one problem. He got it wrong. His hypothesis turned out to be wrong. So how are we to evaluate that little guy? There are some who say that when we assess students, their answers are either right or wrong, acceptable or unacceptable. But we know that the stuff of education is way more complicated than that. There are many layers of meaning to what goes on in the classroom. Learning is filled with texture and nuance and complexity. That little guy's hypothesis might have been wrong, but he was doing a lot that was right. Still, the politicians and the corporate think tanks are hard at work peddling their simplistic answers to the complicated challenges we face in our public schools. For them, it's easy. Privatize, standardize, centralize, voucherize, charterize. And that gets us back, I'm sure you're wondering when, to the Institute for Public Education. When something happens in education in BC, who gets to comment? The Premier, the Minister, the Fraser Institute, sometimes the BCTF President, although she or he is often painted as self-serving. We believe it's time for an independent, nonpartisan, pro-public education think tank to be part of the conversation. And that's what the Institute for Public Education is and will be. Because it's not only how we assess and evaluate that little guy in that kindergarten class that needs to be discussed. It's funding and curriculum and governance, it's teacher education and supports for students with special needs, it's Aboriginal education, and it's inequality and the challenges faced by kids who come to school hungry. The Institute for Public Education, BC, is a policy, analysis, and research organization that will engage in the debate on these and many, many more issues from a pro-public education perspective. For those of you who are familiar with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, think of the CCPA focused entirely on education issues. That's the Institute for Public Education. We invite you to check us out online, to follow us on Facebook, to attend our events. There's one coming up on March 8th at Simon Fraser Woodward's on education funding. There's a handout that I think will be outside on the desk that talks about the details of that meeting. Before I finish, I want to introduce you to some of the people involved in the Institute, and I'd ask them to stand as they're introduced. They're all in the back corner hiding. Our executive director is Dr. Sandra Matheson. Up you get, Sandra. Professor of Education at the University of British Columbia. Sandra's research focuses on educational evaluation and especially on the potential and limits of evaluation to support democratic ideals and promote justice in education. Other members of the board, Dan Leitch. Dan, stand up. An associate professor at the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University. Dr. Leitch is co-editor of the International Journal of Education Policy and Leadership. Adrienne Montani, who some of you will know, is the provincial coordinator for First Call, BC's Child and Youth Advocacy Coalition. She served as the child and youth advocate for the City of Vancouver and was a trustee and chairperson of the Vancouver School Board. Dr. Larry Keane, who many of you will know, is Director of Research and Technology at the BCTF. He's a research associate at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and has written extensively, not exclusively, on issues related to globalization and education. E. Wayne Ross is professor in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy at the University of British Columbia. Prior to joining the UBC faculty, he was Distinguished University Scholar and Chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning at the University of Louisville. They taught me to say Louisville. My name's David Chudnovsky. I'm a past lot of things and proud to have been co-author of the Charter for Public Education. There's another handout that will be at the table that talks about a little bit more about the Institute for Public Education BC and the people who are on our board. I want to thank you again. We hope this short introduction has created in you an interest and a curiosity about our institute, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thanks.